Stop. Just stop for a second and imagine this. You are trapped inside a steel box no bigger than a hallway closet. The walls aren't wood or drywall. They are 4 inches of hardened cold steel. It is the middle of winter, 40 degrees below zero outside, but inside this box it is sweltering hot. The air is thick. It tastes of diesel fumes, burnt gunpowder, ozone, and the sour, stinging stench of 5 men who haven't washed in 3 weeks. You are crushed shoulder to shoulder with strangers. You can't stand up, you can't stretch your legs, and you haven't left this seat in 48 hours. And then, right when the artillery starts falling outside, you feel it, that sharp, familiar cramping in your stomach. Your body sends a signal that cannot be ignored. You have to go to the bathroom. It's an emergency. But outside that steel wall, the world is ending. The air is filled with red-hot shrapnel. Snipers are watching the tree line, waiting for a hatch to crack open just an inch. You cannot leave. There is no toilet. There is no plumbing. And if you open that door, you die. Whatever you think you know about World War II is probably about glory, strategy, and horsepower. We talk about the 88mm cannons and the unbreakable armor of the Tiger tanks, but we never talk about the reality. We never talk about the filth. Today, we are going to expose the most humiliating, dangerous, and unspoken nightmare of the war. It wasn't the enemy tank on the horizon, it was the enemy inside the machine. This is the story of the steel coffin and the biological crisis that broke men when the bombs couldn't. Let's go back to December 24, 1944. It is 3 a.m. in the Ardennes forest, right on the blood-soaked border of Belgium. The Battle of the Bulge is reaching its freezing, desperate climax. Buried deep in the snowline, camouflaged by pine branches and white sheets, sits a German Panther tank. Inside, Corporal Hans Müller is curled up on the metal floor of the turret. He is 19 years old, serving as a loader. Outside, the trees are snapping under the weight of ice and the temperature is lethal. But inside the Panther, the atmosphere is dense and suffocating. The residual heat from the massive Maybach engine, combined with the body heat of 5 nervous men, creates a sickening greenhouse effect. Hans has been locked inside this 45-ton beast for exactly 42 hours. His unit is cut off. American artillery has been hammering their grid square since dawn the previous day. To open a hatch now is to invite death. A single fragment of shrapnel from a proximity-fused shell or a well-placed round from an invisible sniper would end his life in a millisecond. So, the crew stays buttoned up, all hatches locked, periscopes down. In this confinement, Hans is fighting a war that doesn't appear on any general's map. It isn't against the Allies, it's against his own biology. The pain in his abdomen is blinding. For days, the crew has been surviving on dry combat rations, dense processed food designed to preserve energy but wreak havoc on the gut. To wash it down, they've been drinking water from a jerry can that was likely rusted or contaminated. The result is dysentery. It is the soldier's curse, the most common, humiliating, and debilitating disease of the front lines. His stomach twists violently. He looks around the turret. The tank commander is asleep, sitting upright, his forehead resting against the rubber pad of the cupola periscope. The gunner is awake, staring at nothing, smoking a cheap, unfiltered cigarette, trying to mask the foul odor that already permeates the vehicle. Hans knows what he has to do. It is a ritual, it is shameful, it is dirty, but it is his only option. You have to understand the engineering here to understand the horror. The Panther tank was a marvel of destruction. It had a high-velocity 75mm main gun. It had sloped armor that could bounce Allied shells. But the engineers who designed it, men sitting in comfortable offices in Berlin with coffee and restrooms down the hall, never designed a bathroom. Every cubic inch of the interior was claimed by machinery, ammunition racks, hydraulic traverse gears, radio equipment, drive shafts. Human comfort wasn't just low on the list, it wasn't on the list at all. Hans looks toward the ready rack ammunition storage. He sees the rows of 75mm shells, shiny, lethal,
and most importantly, large. He reaches out and grabs a spent casing. This is a heavy brass cylinder from a round they fired hours ago at an American position. It's about 2 feet long with a wide diameter. It's still warm to the touch, coated in soot and propellant residue. He taps the gunner on the shoulder. He doesn't speak. He doesn't have to. He just gives a small, desperate nod toward the floor. The gunner understands immediately. In the brotherhood of the tank, this is the moment where you look away. The gunner turns his back, facing the steel wall of the turret, staring at the transverse mechanism. He is granting Hans the only privacy available in a world where privacy has ceased to exist. Hans struggles to lower his trousers in the cramped space. The floor of the turret is a basket that rotates with the gun. It is slippery with leaked hydraulic oil and condensation. The tank isn't perfectly still. The ground shakes from distant mortar impacts, vibrating the steel plates against his spine. He squats over the empty shell casing. It is a desperate balancing act. The rim of the brass casing is sharp. It cuts into his skin. He has to hold himself steady against the breech block of the cannon. The stakes are incredibly high. If he slips, if he spills the contents, he will turn this enclosed steel box into an uninhabitable sewer for himself and his 4 comrades. They still have to live here, eat here, and fight here for days. As he relieves himself, the smell hits instantly. In a house, a smell dissipates. In a sealed tank with no ventilation, the odor is a physical assault. It is thick, nauseating, and warm. It mixes with the smell of fear, stale sweat, and oil. It makes the eyes water. The other crew members don't move. They breathe through their mouths. They pretend this isn't happening. When the act is done, Hans pulls his uniform back together. He is shivering, not from the cold, but from a mix of humiliation and relief. But the problem isn't solved yet. He is now holding a heavy brass cylinder filled with toxic biological waste. What does he do with it? He cannot open the main hatch. Opening the roof of the tank lights up the interior silhouette. It invites a grenade or a sniper bullet. It would be suicide. Hans looks to the rear of the turret. On the side of the Panther tank, there is a small circular port. In the manuals, this is called the pistol port. It was designed so the crew could shove a pistol or a submachine gun out to shoot enemy infantry trying to climb onto the engine deck. It is a small hole, barely wide enough for a human arm. Hans unscrews the heavy locking bolt. As the plug comes loose, a blast of freezing night air hisses into the turret. For a second, it cuts through the stench inside. With steady, careful hands, he pushes the open end of the shell casing through the hole. He tilts it. He dumps the contents onto the black, churned-up snow of the Ardennes forest. Then, with a quick, fluid motion, he shoves the entire brass casing out. He doesn't want it back. He slams the port plug back into place and spins the locking screw until his hands hurt. He sits back down in the darkness, exhausted. No one speaks. No one makes a joke. It is an unwritten rule among tank crews. What happens inside the steel stays inside the steel. But this scene wasn't unique to Hans or the Germans. This was the universal nightmare of armored warfare. Across the lines, American tankers in their M4 Shermans faced a similar hell, but with a different set of problems. The Sherman had a floor escape hatch located behind the assistant driver's seat. In theory, this hatch was for escaping if the tank caught fire. In practice, it became the world's most dangerous toilet. Imagine the situation inside a Sherman. You're under mortar fire. You can't go outside. So a crewman has to crawl under the seats, unbolt a heavy steel plate in the floor, and expose the ground beneath them. They would relieve themselves directly onto the grass or mud passing under the tank. But this was terrifying. If the tank had to move suddenly to dodge a shell, the man using the hole could be crushed by the machinery or dragged by the ground. Even worse, if a landmine detonated anywhere near them, the blast wave would come straight up through that open hole, liquefying anyone crouching over it. It was a game of Russian roulette, played with basic bodily functions. On the Eastern Front, for the Soviet T-34 crews, it was even worse. During the massive Soviet offensives, crews lived inside their tanks for weeks at a time. The Russian winter froze anything that left the human body in seconds. Veterans of the Red Army recall that the interior of a T-34 often smelled worse than a pigsty. The mixture of body odor, rotting food scraps, cordite smoke, and human waste created a toxic atmosphere. The medical consequences were severe. Many soldiers suffered from chronic constipation, a psychological reaction to stress and the lack of a safe place to defecate. Some men would go 5, 6, or 7 days without a bowel movement, their bodies simply shut down out of pure terror and a lack of privacy. But when nature finally won, the shell casing method was the universal solution. It was the great equalizer. German, American, British, Soviet, it didn't matter. If you were a tanker, a large caliber shell casing was the most important piece of non-combat equipment you owned. Loaders, like Hans, often had the worst job. Since they handled the ammo, they were often the ones tasked with managing the waste-filled casings. There are horror stories of crews in the heat of battle spinning the turret to engage a target and accidentally kicking over these makeshift chamber pots. Imagine trying to load a cannon while slipping in filth, fighting for your life while covered in waste. The war is not just glory and medals. It is dirt, it is indignity, and it is trying to keep a shred of humanity in subhuman conditions. Back in the Ardennes, the night eventually ends. For Hans, it felt like a lifetime. The smell never truly left. It clung to his wool uniform, his skin, his hair. But he survived. He survived not just the American shells, but the silent test of endurance inside the machine. Around noon, the radio crackles. The sector is quiet, a temporary ceasefire. The order comes to stand down. Hans pushes the heavy main hatch open. The fresh, freezing air hits his face like a hammer. It is painful, but it is sweet. He climbs out, his legs weak and cramping, filling his lungs with clean oxygen. He looks down at the side of the tank. The snow around the vehicle is pristine white, except for the black scorch marks of gunpowder and the brown stains where waste had been ejected from the pistol ports. It was a disgusting sight, but it was proof of life. They had endured. Today, if you visit a war museum, you will see the mighty tigers, the agile panthers, and the rugged Shermans. They sit silently on pedestals. They are freshly painted. They look invincible. We look at them and think of strategy, power, and glory. We imagine the knights of the Round Table in steel chariots. But the next time you see a documentary with tanks rolling across the screen, I want you to remember Hans. Remember that inside those steel beasts there were no robots. There were terrified, sick, and desperate human beings. Mechanized warfare eliminated the horses, but it did not eliminate the basic needs of the men. The engineers could solve the problems of ballistics and transmission ratios, but they couldn't solve the problem of human biology. In war, dignity is always the first casualty, and for the tank crews of World War II, a spent brass shell casing wasn't just military trash. In their darkest, most desperate hours, it was the most important piece of equipment on board, because sometimes the hardest battle wasn't against the enemy you could see through the periscope. It was the battle against the reality of being human inside a machine built for death.